Hey, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone. I know like there are a lot of people coming from different parts of the world here, and we have a fantastic panel and a great topic. Now, not as interesting of cocktails and other things that we were talking earlier, but as several of you may be aware that there was an executive order that was passed a couple of months ago. I guess it's day 62. I know somebody's counting days over here, and there has been a huge repercussion. There has been a lot of actions or follow-up action, which is we have uh, Plugfest happening. There are some requests for comments are happening. And so, on our panel over here to discuss is we have Allan Friedman. Allan Friedman is the man behind this SBOM. He is been working on this for several years, and then finally he kind of got it to get it out. Then we have, Cassie Crossley. She's the product security leader at Schneider Electrical Fortune 500, and someone who lives and breathes, though she may not be on front, but she is definitely one of the big influencers on the backside. Then we also have Queern, who's from KPMG. Again, he lives and breathes his policies, talks to people at all the various sector and everything. And last but not the least, the Gary Hayslip, author of 4 books. And if you have not heard, you should listen and look at his the fourth book, latest book, which is out there, which is already a bestseller. So with that said, with this esteemed panel, what I would like to do here is I'd like to go around here. And again, before that, I'd like to take a minute and talk and thanks Purple Book for arranging this. For the people who don't know, Purple Book community, we are promoting and our vision is to democratize software security. All these issues that has been happening lately, whether it's supply chain and other things, these are all related. So we want to ensure that there is a big education about that. And a quick introduction about myself. My name is Nikhil Gupta. I'm the co-founder and CEO of ArmorCode Software Security. So with that said, I'll start with Allan, the man behind, because it's very important to know that why we are doing what we are doing, right? So Allan, why this and why now?
So first, I want to be clear that SBOM as an idea has been around for quite some time. It was even proposed in legislation and regulation back in 2014, and there's a large community of people who've been sort of driving this. I was just the person who sort of said, hey, this seems like a role of government and to play a step in catalyzing it. And part of the reason is that SBOM really does require coordination across different parts of the ecosystem. It was very much a chicken and egg problem where no one was asking for this data, so no one was supplying it. And the reason that no one was supplying it is that no one was asking for it. And so that chicken and egg coordination problem is exactly the type of work that I think the government can really play a key role in to catalyze industry action, because it has to come from the community, from folks that are building software and using software. So starting in 2018, it was almost a year, 3 years ago, we brought experts from across the ecosystem, different sectors, different parts of the supply chain, from open source to commercial to end customers, say, let's tackle this problem, figure out what we need to do. The first phase was just defining it. What's the what, the why, and the how. Over the last year and a half, we focused on implementation. What are the obstacles to implementation? How do we think about making this a reality? And then, of course, this spring, the White House picked this up and said, this is an important part of our agenda to secure the country's cybersecurity space. And they put it in context with a large range of other efforts in software assurance and supply chain to say, we're going to use the power of the purse. We're going to say that everything that the US government buys ultimately is going to come with a software bill of materials. And so one of the things that just happened is NTIA just published our report defining officially what are the minimum elements of an SBOM. And that's a starting point. We're not locked into that. That's the floor, not the ceiling. And that is going to evolve over time, but it lays out a vision of how both government is going to look at it and also now a national and indeed an international approach that we can all work on.
No, that's fantastic. And you're spot on here. For initiative as critical as this, you need to have somebody to, for lack of better word, herd the cattle around to ensure that, people are aware and bringing the information. But is this only a domestic initiative, or do you think, and are you getting support internationally on this as well?
One of the things we're very proud of is just this week, we published our first Japanese translation of one of the core SBOM documents. So SBOM at a glance is now something that we can communicate internationally. And the Japanese government through METI and through JP Cert has been involved in this from the beginning. We have a lot of colleagues in Brussels and in London that are interested in this. And I'm going to be giving a talk at Black Hat with my German counterpart. So this really, in the German government. So this really is something that is not just not American, but has the active participation of governments around the world. And of course, this is useless unless we have active buy-in from the product security teams around the world. And we're really happy to have, multinational companies like Cassie's that have played a key leadership role.
No, that's fantastic. And one of the things what happens is then that as like any other things, right? So you have these best practices, but unfortunately, a lot of people, they do not end up implementing it. So do you see down the road some kind of a compliance specifically coming for SBOM, or one of the compliance like FedRAMP or something like that, kind of asking for SBOM requirements, if you will?
I think we're going to end up there, but the first step really is going to be industry leadership of folks who care about it, demonstrating that they have this capability, especially now that this has reached the highest level of publicity and policymaker attention. So folks are just going to want to sort of show that they have this capability. And then perhaps more importantly, customers start asking for it in the private sector. Again, folks who are in the high assurance space or who are willing to pay a little extra for security, or who are willing to work with their suppliers to say, yes, we want this level of engagement. But ultimately, we are going to see this just as part of any other security control. There's nothing magical about it. In fact, the goal is to make this turnkey. And so I'd like to see this slotting into existing models as we can verify that it scales and it meets the needs that we're trying to, and the goals that we're trying to execute here. FedRAMP has come up because in particular, maybe we can get into this later, one of the open questions we have is how does SBOM apply to SaaS and cloud-based software? Because right now, a lot of the use cases are about on-prem and embedded systems.
Got it. Makes sense. Makes sense. So I will just switch gear here and I'll move on to Caleb. Caleb works at KPMG and he probably talks across the industry verticals and governments. So since this executive order has come out, are you seeing larger organizations beginning to think about it and act on it?
Hey, Nikhil. Yes, absolutely. It was very effective in giving permission, I think, to prioritize the topic. A lot of security decision makers, it's no surprise, right? I mean, the well-known shortage in cyber talent, AppSec talent is scarce and DevSecOps talent is even more scarce. Like, there's a lot of things that are top of mind for decision makers at large organizations and where they invest time and resources, because they already have so much on their plate. We know, by and large, we have a lot of room for improvement in how we do this whole cybersecurity thing in general. Right? There's no shortage of ideas and things to work on. But the executive order, I think, made it legitimized a little bit. I mean, there's probably a better verb, but when we say this to our clients and say, this is something that you should think about, because of all the great reasons that Allan can do a great job explaining and has for a long time. It's low friction, low cost, and high ability to lose risk across these different stakeholder groups. This is something that we should invest in and finally kind of put on a timeline. And so since the executive order came out, yes, I mean, I can think of a couple of examples, including I've talked offline with some of the folks on this call about large manufacturers, global manufacturers who now have agreed that this is something they want to get done across the enterprise in the next 12 months. And I know there's a lot to that, and we're excited to be a part of that story with them. But across business units, what does it not only look like to generate an SBOM, and how do I prioritize which applications and which portfolios and what frequency and all of those great important questions, but what do we do with them once we've got them?
Got it. Got it. No, that makes perfect sense. And so, are you still seeing people like just like a technology? You have a technology adoption life cycle. You have a innovator, early adopter, early majority. So even in the larger organizations, probably the manufacturers are going first. Are you seeing any kind of trend over there?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, Nikhil, because I think for a while now we've all been conditioned to expect some of the most exciting innovations in technology and software to maybe come out of Silicon Valley, and that's understandable. But I think the groups that I see the most uptake in software bills and materials are not something we would traditionally associate with Silicon Valley. It's healthcare, manufacturing, energy, and others who I'm excited to see them be recognized as the leaders in this space. And I know we've got a great example in the call here today with Cassie, but we do see it in those pockets where I think otherwise, you would say, we'll get to those folks later. Those industries will catch up as we talk about this new shiny thing in technology. But anyways, I'm excited about that.
And what about, as Allan was mentioning, on the SaaS side, right? On the cloud and the SaaS. So have you been talking to, and there are a lot of large companies, right, which are in S&P 500 or Fortune 500 who are pure SaaS based. So is there any talks or conversations, or what do you think over there?
Yeah, I've been on a couple of phone calls with some of the name brand household SaaS providers that sometimes are category leaders in their respective SaaS offering. And I think the answer is they don't know yet what it means to do this, which I think is understandable. I think I would be happy to see us get this right first with kind of legacy on-prem software products, and then give ourselves time and some grace to figure out the SaaS stuff. I don't know how you feel about that, Allan.
Happy to dive into sort of the challenges of SaaS, but I think there's nothing magical about how we produce SaaS software. In fact, I would encourage, because modern cloud native systems often have more modern dev tools and more modern dev pipelines, it's actually easier to capture this data. Often, not always, but often. The challenge with SaaS is how we use this data. Where, right, if it's on-prem, if something is sitting on my network, I have the thing that's controlling the big thing that could blow up if it's mishandled. Then I, as the network admin, have certain responsibilities, which is to say, if there's a vulnerability, I can take specific actions. I can tune my IDS, I can segment my network. I can say, I'm not going to do anything, but I'm going to tell my threat intel provider that the second you see any exploit in the wild, let me know and I'll yank it off the internet. There are actions I can take. It's not clear what that action set is for customers of SaaS providers, which isn't to say that the risk is completely solved. But a lot of the actions that we would take is at the moment of procurement. And this gets to Nikhil's point about FedRAMP certification. But I think there's certain work that we can have. One of the things we offered in minimum elements is saying anyone who is going to work with a SaaS provider should make sure that they have the capabilities of an SBOM and the internal processes to act on that data, rather than saying, let's find a way to sort of move the data around to the customers in real time. Because of course there's, things evolve faster, and right, even daily builds or hourly builds, it's just unclear what the setup is to use that. But I'm sure this is something we can get into in the Q&A as well.
And I think so, just to add to that, even if the large companies like, Schneider Electric, and we'll get on to Cassie for a minute, there are two components. You have these components which are there, like equipments which are life cycle of 30 years, 40 years. But at the same time, there is a modern aspect where you have a management layer, which is getting the inputs from these various IoT devices and doing analytics on top of that, right? And that is the SaaS part. So definitely, talking about that, Cassie, we'd love to hear, like at Schneider Electric, right? What are you doing with the SBOM? And again, as in continuing with our topic here, if you could also add some color on what is your approach for the traditional hardware equipment versus the management software on the SaaS solution.
Okay, all right. So from a SBOM perspective, I am so proud to say we've been working on the SBOM initiative internally for a couple of years now. We, as most manufacturers, we already were in the hardware bill of materials space. We understood the software bill of materials necessity in large part, and I'll talk about it in a few minutes, but in a large part due to us needing to understand what's in our portfolio of products. So having a software bill of materials for our own use is extremely important. So we have been working for a long period of time with our tool vendors in order to capture that data. One of the struggles, honestly, is that the tool vendors are very focused on open source, and we also need to be aware of any proprietary software, any commercial software that we're including with our products as part of our products. So the SBOM initiative is a very important initiative for our company, and being part of the NTIA initiative, the stakeholder initiative, and being aware of what's going on, working with our tool vendors, having conversations about what our requirements would be, because when we're talking about our, let's just say even our embedded products, but all of our portfolio, it's thousands of products. Not all of them would be software or firmware based, of course, but many of our components and our not only legacy, but any current development. But it is a very large portfolio, and that includes brand label products, things that we work with suppliers on to in a partnership. So we have that necessity to understand what's in all of those products and devices. And you asked about the SaaS or software. I would say that there's a couple categories there. You have just software only, which in many cases, especially when working with the edge devices, we do have still true software and not only just what we call digital offers and more cloud-based offers. So we've got a very interesting conversation going on also about cloud because of that. You've got that relationship between those edge devices and our SaaS platforms, which is different than some of the other SaaS providers, where they have more just an interaction of maybe a browser. So it's extremely different, a very interesting architecture and infrastructure conversation, because there are, as Allan said, there's mitigating controls that you want to consider in all those spaces. So understanding, for example, the cloud infrastructure and what is being utilized can help those that own those edge devices, to work together and look at the proper approach from an infrastructure standpoint.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And so typically what happens is, I think so it's all coming from, it's like a food chain, if you will. And for several vendors, you are a customer, and I'm sure you have your own customers as well. So if you could just tell and share your experiences that how your customers are kind of motivating you, and there's always a carrot and a stick to vendors like you. And then how are you planning to motivate or with use carrot and a stick to your vendors?
Yes, I am very much in the middle. From a point that we have been working with different segments and industries, one of which that we're very pleased about is we were one of the initiating suppliers to work with the Department of Energy and Idaho National Laboratories on the Citrix program. And that has one of the requests as part of the information that they for part of that program to digest and understand the products was to provide an SBOM. And then we've have, of course, affiliations and relationships in the medical space. So we have been requested from a customer standpoint for SBOM. Again, as I said, we've been working with vendors because there's a couple main points that make it difficult at this point, is making sure we're having a complete SBOM, at least at the, the initial layer. There's multiple layers to an SBOM, and I'll get to that in a moment in regards to our suppliers. But also, what's the distribution model? For example, if someone does want an SBOM, it really depends on what version of they're using of the product. And when you have decades of years where a product has been out and it's got hundreds of versions, in some cases, how do you know you're giving them the right? So there is I think, the Linux Foundation has had quite a bit of conversation on digital bill of materials. There are other groups and other conversations that we're having. How do we operationalize this? I bring it up to Allan quite frequently, is I'm not looking for the ad hoc. I need to be able to manage it at a very just large scale level. And when it comes to our suppliers, the same consideration. A year ago, there was no concept inside of a agreement, cybersecurity agreement, of someone providing software bill of materials. It was often requested as part of architecture reviews and in different areas in order to assess the supplier risk. But now it's something that is a must-have in that space. You really need to understand, while you're not having access to all the IP and the source code, especially in a proprietary commercial software, we need to understand the risk. We need to understand if they're using certain stacks in their code, because the multiple layers, and we'll get to those multiple layers as SBOM progresses in the industry, but we need to be able to address quickly risks that are in both open source and a commercial sense. And having access to those SBOMs, being able to realize how it's incorporated, going those additional steps can really help with that analysis and impact assessments.
Got it. So let's change a gear here, and let's go to Gary here. Gary's on the other side of the spectrum. He's CISO for the largest fund, Vision Fund, $100 billion plus fund, and he has a portfolio of over 200 plus startups. And while it's clear now, like why companies like Schneider Electric kind of needs SBOM. And what are you seeing, Gary, on your side of the camp? And I'm being a startup guy myself, so I know it's like one yet another thing to worry about. But what are you seeing? Number one. Number two is what is your recommendation as a global CISO for your fund to your startups? And third, which is a different, is there is any opportunity? Because now this is a new thing coming on. I'm sure there are several entrepreneurs on the call as well, that what kind of opportunity this may bring. So over to you, Gary.
Well, first I want to say that, not all 240 plus portfolio companies are startups. Many of them are very mature companies, so it's kind of a wide range. It's kind of a mixture. With that said, it is interesting because I do cyber and business continuity due diligence on new possible investments, and we actually do we use NIST CSF as part of my questionnaire, and so I am asking questions about, are they doing pen testing, are they doing code review, what tools are they using, and that kind of stuff. So a lot of the components that would be part of a software bill of materials are being done, so it's I actually look at, and I know, I speak with a lot of different, CISOs at other VC firms and other PE firms where they do something very similar, and even some of them, will even test code, they'll even request, a third party to come in and test code if it's something that's critical or something that's new, a new technology like, crypto coin or something like that. But with that said, I think a lot of the components are there, for it. And I honestly look at, reading through when you go ahead and you read through the executive order, and Section 4 seems to go on forever, and I was reading all the stuff that was in it and the dates by this date, you're going to do this. And of course, NIST looks like NIST is going to be busy for a while. And myself coming from a military and government background, I'm used to working with NIST. I actually think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that we start actually putting together a roadmap. I honestly believe, the larger companies will probably deal with it first. Those that are doing business with the government, maybe it becomes mandatory for them, as they deal with the government, and then that methodology starts becoming a standard that startups start aligning to. And it's going to take time. It isn't going to happen in the next 6 months. My biggest thing that I like about it is the fact that we're actually putting together a standard of what an SBOM is and what the components are. And once you start doing that, then you can start actually putting together the value that it brings. Because then you can start beating the drum of this is how this is going to help you and why. A lot of startups are already doing the code testing. They're already documenting, what open source libraries they're doing. They're already documenting, what third parties they're using, for doing app pen testing, so a lot of the pieces are there, so I'm really looking forward to seeing this kind of mature. And honestly, I'd love for it to be, just part of my process that I do when we're, going ahead and doing due diligence. And because the biggest thing, when you really look at it, when a PE firm or a VC firm is looking at investing in a company, we want the best for that company. We want that company to do well. And for me, I don't see this as being detrimental to the company. I actually see it being a good thing, and I see it being a good thing for the customers who are going to be using whatever that product is that they're creating, or the service that they're providing. And especially at Softbank, we tend to eat our dog food, eat our own dog food. We tend to actually work with and use many of the products that our own portfolio companies have on the market. And so, yeah, I'd like to go ahead and make sure they're secure if I'm going to be putting them in my network.
And so again, as a CISO, one thing which you want is the best of breed softwares, and at the same time, you don't want a plethora of softwares. So here, and this is more of a governance thing than anything else, right? Like, and in my past startup, when it was acquired, and I was telling Cassie and Allan the other day, was that I had my engineers go individually going through each line by line and creating an Excel sheet, because that was a part of requirement. As to your point, whenever the acquiring company is there, they want to ensure, number one, the right licenses are there, right libraries are there. So I can connect the dots here, right? And I see that there's an opportunity. But from your perspective, do you think that it's another one class of the tool would better fit into evolving this? Or do you think, again, from the opportunity perspective, that there's a new class of security software that can be thing as?
Well, and you have to think that, every time the government comes out with something, a requirement, it's an opportunity. And someone's going to take that opportunity and turn it into tomorrow's startup, or turn it into, I kind of look at it as, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me then that we see some companies that are already doing code scanning pivot and now offer something like this. Now offer, SBOM as a service, SBOM in a package, SBOM as a service that's a continuous scanning, continuous remediation, and you can go ahead and pull a report whenever it's needed. Yeah, this would not surprise me at all.
Got it.
There's already stuff out there right now for FedRAMP. I've already seen, and I'm actually a certified auditor, so I've done audit for a number of years. I'm a trained engineer. I'm constantly looking at how things are connected. I'm a systems thinker, and I look at the pieces. And yeah, this wouldn't surprise me. This would just be actually this for me. This feels like it would just be a maturity of stepping beyond OWASP, and now let's adding a little bit more maturity to the process of documenting, all these various components, and then using that documentation to state that you're meeting a specific level of risk. And I honestly think that it will pick up the more customers ask for it. So it's I'm actually really kind of excited to see where this goes.
Great. So Allan, a quick thing on that. I know you had this plug fest where you are initiating and encouraging companies and the vendors to go and work with some of the SBOM vendors and trying to get the interoperability. And so from that perspective, for this particular thing, what are your thoughts on this? That how do you see this evolve? And as Gary mentioned, OWASP is pretty important from the application perspective. Do you see any kind of either OWASP, SAM, software maturity model expanding into this, or do you see any new offshoot of OWASP for this?
I think one of the most gratifying things about the work we've been doing is exactly as Gary said, seeing these startups come up. There are now at least 3 or 4 brand new companies that are primarily focused on this question. Some of them quite well funded. There are at least 3 that I've talked to over the last few months that are still in stealth mode. Now I'm from the Department of Commerce, right? The goal here is to empower the business world to heal itself and to sort of have this be driven and make it easier and cheaper. And folks who want to do it in-house should do it in-house. But one of the things we've learned about security and IT in general is have it right. Let's specialize. We've had this plug fest where we're trying to bring together both the tool vendors as well as some of the open source folks, because a lot of these projects really are collaborative, to sort of say, hey, let's make sure our tools work together and can map together, and that we're going to be competing at some level, but we need to make sure that my output and your output at least have enough in similarity so that we can compare it. And that's our vision. We're trying to avoid bake-offs and direct competition for the SBOM, and really say we should be competing not on what is the SBOM, but on how you can use it and helping people use it and have value add. Okay.
No, that makes sense. And I just wanted to switch to Cassie here, right? Because she has been having a big army of people trying to do it in-house. But can you translate, the benefits of SBOM into dollars and cents? You don't need to kind of go into a lot of details, but your experience when it comes to the benefits.
Sure. And I think that all of us recognize that there are more and more vulnerabilities that just come out in, let's just say, a collection, Urgent 11, Ripple, Trek 20, all of them. There's like a group. And so when it's not just one anymore, let's take any Microsoft one, any kind, there's usually a batch because it's affiliated with certain areas, or researchers have dug in and really taken their time to really break something apart to find a collection. So what we're seeing is that what many years ago might have been, an evaluation and impact assessment where you're looking across your development teams, that when you're looking at these large number of batches and they're coming, one every other month, or especially when there's new vulnerabilities really being researched, they come out in just like big waves, it seems like. When you have a large portfolio, looking at, you can't just say, oh, do I use this stack? The first step is, oh, do I use that stack? So imagine trying to reach across this very large portfolio to find just the instances, and then you have impact analysis where you actually need to really look and see, do you compile that in? Is that is that a impact for yours? So while SBOM is not going to be able to save all of the hours, having an SBOM and having a collection of SBOMs for those multiple versions so you can find the affected versions will save for each team, hours and hours. So when you take that across thousands of products, we're talking thousands of hours a year. And those person hours take away from time that could be done for feature enhancements and other benefits to the customer and the product line. Cybersecurity is becoming a large task for every development team out there. We know it. And what SBOMs can offer is a way to better pinpoint, look at the risk analysis, being able to understand. So we're really excited that we can leverage that. Not only can our customers leverage it, but we personally can leverage that to save those thousands of hours.
Thanks. And I know, Caleb, like you're talking to a lot of customers, and I guess one of the question is why, but the next question is like, where do I get funding from, if you will? So if you can share that when you are having this discussion with the customers and all, and how do you articulate the value proposition or the benefits, and how do you expect companies to generate some budget for this?
Yep. So this question applies to a lot of the same asks in the DevSecOps space, where you have the CISO's team who often says, thou shalt, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do this. And sometimes the CIOs or the people running the product teams, the CTOs, whoever, they have their own backlog of important things they got to do, and sometimes they may not necessarily always consider security first. Like that security, we know, doesn't always get prioritized at the top all the time. But in terms of where the funding comes from, in the experience that I've seen so far, the level of effort to get this done can be relatively cheap compared to a lot of other enterprise security initiatives. For example, and I got a question for Cassie about this that I'll come back to in a minute, about how it looks to make the ask and what it looks like across the enterprise, because here's what I'm seeing. In one large client we're working with, where they have many business units, and each business unit has dozens or hundreds of its own applications. What is the governance and what is the choke point where you can insert this requirement for it to get done? So in a lot of large organizations, there's different, I'll say, maturity levels of how they govern software development. And here's an example of that. Maybe for each of the 500 app teams out there that you have, there's 500 pipelines, okay? Or maybe there's an intentional effort and a roadmap that says we've got 500 for our 500 app teams, but in 18 months, we're gonna have 300 pipelines. And then, and at some point, we're going to get down to 5 blessed pipelines. And in those 5 blessed pipelines, we know exactly how to easily, with little friction and maybe even little cost, generate an SBOM. Or we could go door to door across the 500 app teams and get each of them to do it their own way. Probably not the best way. So what we're seeing at large clients is that they have an intentional effort underway to make uniform the dev environment and the pipelines they use, and insert the software that usually open source to generate a what we'll call compliant SBOM, or something that meets our expectations today. And that's the choke point where we insert the ask, and it's very low level of effort. The app teams may not even know what's happening because it really doesn't affect their lives day in and day out yet. Later it will, because we exploit and take advantage and leverage these SBOMs to find insights that may do things like say, hey, did we even know that across our portfolio, we've got this distribution of components and frameworks and languages. Has anybody done this analysis before? But the SBOM gives us that data to do that, and then make intentional decisions that really can drive down cost and technical debt when we start to, again, homogenize on the right components and frameworks that meet the business goals. So I'm getting excited. But Cassie, I'd love to hear how you guys are doing that at Schneider.
Yeah, I don't think we would be that much different than probably what Gary is with his audit background is. We see it more as a control points. In fact, there's a couple questions in the Q&A, one of which was how software development practice will change with SBOM becoming mandatory for vendors. That's an interesting question. There's really 2 control points that are there. Is that a control point that we're IEC 62443 4-1 secure development lifecycle certified. I've got to mention that. I'm very proud of that. So from that, our requirements are, if you're bringing something in, you should be collecting the SBOM. Like I said, it wasn't officially in agreements or whatever, but for open source and other things, you need to understand what you're digesting as part of your framework of what you're building, however that's being done. So that's one major control. However, how they do that, when we're working with many company, we've got thousands and thousands in R&D and hundreds of dev locations, multi-hundreds of projects. We can't dictate you must do it exactly this way. So the control point is there. And then at the completion of the project, so goal code, release, whatever, whether it be DevSecOps or something else, the control point that an SBOM shall exist for that version is the other major control point. So whether they've done it through, right at the build time, that's great, whether it be done through a static analysis tool, but then they need to verify that it captured everything, because it's, a lot of them aren't capturing commercial components yet. So there is that control that's very important to that. So that's how we're doing it. We're not, the other way is we're looking at, if you mentioned environments, like if you're this type of system, here's how we recommend you do this. So we will have guidelines for our various, the multi different ways. And I could see that working pretty much the same. I think what Gary might experience too is rather than give them a exact prescription, is to give them those guidelines and controls.
Yeah, no, that's good.
I was curious, for you, Allan, and also for you, Cassie, I'm just curious, do you guys see it as this matures, it actually gets folded into, some of the certifications that are already out there, for, like, if you're going up, say, for ISO, or if you're going up or you're doing NIST CSF, or even doing SOC 2, now all of a sudden there's a part in there where you need to request the SBOM for any critical apps that are third party, or I'm just kind of curious. I think that would be one of the quickest ways to really mature this and make it to where it's kind of, a mandatory piece, for organizations, would be if it folded into something like that.
I agree completely that I think we're ultimately going to end up at that level. And in fact, there was some discussion in ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, over the last few years about just having some very lightweight language around software transparency as part of even 27000 series. One of the things that we've been careful to do as a community is to avoid what we might consider premature formal standardization. We want to make sure that this SBOM model can work, and can work for the people who are actually going to derive the benefit. And so that means we need to define it well, have an iterative loop. I kind of like to describe the work that NTIA has done as agile policymaking, because it's not, we try to avoid the waterfall model of, let's just try to create a national law and just see if it breaks everything or if it works. So we've tried to say, hey, let's try it, let's experiment, let's get feedback from communities like the medical device community and the energy community, as well as traditional enterprise IT, and type that into the feedback loop. That's why, it really was 3 years into the process before even the US government said, here's the official view that we're going to have on it. And then now our next phase looking ahead is going to be to operationalize SBOM and scale SBOM. Once we're at that level, then I think with a number of other incentives, then I think the next way to really help it get up that growth curve is going to be for communities to say, yeah, we want this as our natural part. We're seeing, it's been teased in regulation in the healthcare community. We're seeing some governments around the world sort of start to look at this that are a little more forward leaning, and we want to make sure that no one gets ahead of the community. But I think certifications is the right way. If I will have succeeded if 3 years from now, no one is treating SBOM as a unique thing. We just treat it as a natural part of how we do asset management, vulnerability management, DevSecOps, right? It should just fold into all of our tools automatically. And if we don't have that in 3 years, then you should feel free to yell at me.
I think so. That's thanks, Allan, for sharing that perspective. And I know, Gary, you wanted to get Cassie's perspective, and I was just looking at time and also the questions, and I think so. This is a question is tied together. So here, I thought I'll ask that questions. So does complying with the SBOM initiatives make our SDLC safer by process in the future? And Cassie, you were mentioning that you are proud certified secure software development lifecycle, and you also mentioned about DevSecOps. And I think so all of these things intersect. And if you could share, how you're seeing it in Schneider, and essentially, when we were talking about making this, getting the secure software development lifecycle, and since you have been implementing SBOM for like 2 or 3 years, did it play a role in getting that certification or making it secure?
Yeah, well, I can't comment really to answer
Sure.
either the safer or the more secure. I joined the SBOM initiative with NTIA because I'm passionate about it, and I believe that for all parties, it is extremely important to know what you're including and what you're providing. So I think it's just so beneficial, but I just can't provide any perspective or conjecture on safer or more secure.
Yeah, no, we totally understand that. And again, Caleb, in your experience, as you have been engaging with a lot of customers and all, what have you been hearing? And do you hear this SBOM and DevSecOps and SDLC kind of being brought up in the same conversation?
Absolutely. I think it's another arrow in the quiver when we start defining what good looks like across the software development lifecycle. And at each step, we have certain behaviors or capabilities or controls that we want to see happen. And of course, they all don't have their own, or they all don't have the same ability to reduce risk, and they all have different maybe levels of effort. But at least in the build phase, before we get to production, whether it's a static application security testing, a dynamic software composition analysis, which often leads us to a conversation around SBOMs. It's just what good looks like today is to implement these things. And if there's a toggle switch in your SCA service or whatever other testing software you use that will now generate what we consider, at least at the moment, a compliant SBOM, yeah, you toggle that switch. And then there's the next question: what do you do with them, and where do you put them, and how do you make use of them? As I hinted at earlier, but it's absolutely what good looks like today. Everybody, I don't see anybody disagreeing with that.
Got it. And Gary, your perspective on that?
Like I said, like I mentioned earlier, I mean, I don't think anybody disagrees that there should be a need, that we need to do something. I mean, I'm already being asked by executive teams, every time one of these attacks comes out, how does this impact us, or are we hit by this? And what I find talking with peers is that people are like, this is just incessant. It's just one after the other after the other. So I definitely think there's a need. And when you read section 4, in that document, I think the attestation piece will be big for leadership teams for these software companies. The fact that your team can be saying, hey, they're doing it and they're producing documents, but now you as a corporate leader of that organization have to attest that you are actually doing it for real. And if they put any teeth involved with that, so that if you've got any software as a service company, you got any one of these companies that they're saying they're doing it, and then they have a breach, and it can then come to find out, well, that breach could have been prevented because come to find out they faked their paperwork or they did whatever, So I mean, I don't think any of us, are stating that this shouldn't be done. I think the big question is what's it going to look like? Once this whole cake gets baked, is it going to be something that we're all ready to eat, or what? I mean, it's. Yeah, and I think that's the interesting piece right now is kind of watching it all get put together. And I definitely like the attestation piece. I can't say that word. Just because I honestly believe this management of risk is more than just on the software development teams. And I think it should be up and down the whole structure in an organization. the leadership of the organization that's making money, off of the service, off of the software and stuff like that, they're making revenue and everything, they should be able to state that, yes, we are doing the best possible, following specific, whatever is best practice, whatever their tools are, being able to demonstrate, and they should be willing to go ahead and state that, yeah, our teams are kicking butt, they're following what they're doing. We've got, artifacts that prove that we're testing. Oh yeah.
Yeah, so again, I was looking through the questions. I think so most of them are covered here. Again, one of the question here is, there is a mention that this has been talked back in like even all the way go back in 2014. So all of a sudden, right, like why now, right? Because a lot of these things have been talked earlier. Is that some of the breaches that happened, or because you may have some perspective? Like we all are agreeing here that definitely it's a good thing, it's needed, but all of a sudden, why now? Allan, I'll put you on spot here.
And I always have to be very clear at this sort of conversation about what SBOM will not do. And we can look at some of the high-profile incidents like the SolarWinds breach, and we have to be very, very clear. An SBOM would not have led to the detection or prevention of that style of attack. Right? That style of attack went after the tools, and the SBOM vision, even at the sophisticated level, is going to be the tools will automatically generate the data. So if your tools can't be trusted, fine. However, if we're trying to build the landscape and the ultimate future when we can prevent and detect these attacks, SBOM is a necessary but not sufficient component, where we need to sort of track the components and then track the tools and make sure that everything is signed along the way. We're going to get there. We need a lot more work to make sure that data is semantically valuable so that we can actually say, hey, you compiled this tools in a robust, predictable fashion with these flags set. Well, we don't currently have the ability to compare that across different organizations. We need to get there. And some folks like CNCF are working on that in their very specific modern examples. Legacy is a different story. So as we think about the threat landscape, the most important thing for SBOM is to say, hey, known vulnerabilities. And that really is such an obvious low-hanging fruit that it still baffles me that we're comfortable in a world where organizations can't easily say, yes, I can validate that this vulnerability that was just founded is not in my software or is not on my network that I'm operating. And that's really what SBOM is about.
Right. And again, that's a very good point on that front. So I think so we have 4 minutes. I want to talk, one of the things which was mentioned in the request for comments was that it was a little controversial, or I was reading through the comments. So the question here is that now we need SBOM. Is that something should be published, or is this something should be produced on demand or on request? And again, it's 4 minutes, and we have 4 people. I thought each of us, you can give it like a 1 minute take on that. So I'll start with you, Allan. Yeah.
It's going to be, it depends. There are going to be companies that are publishing this today. So for example, Jupiter One just said, hey, this is easy. We have our live build on our website now. There are going to be companies just for regulatory reasons or their lack of comfort are saying we're not going to publish directly, but then it's incumbent on them to make sure that they can communicate it securely downstream. The good news is many of these organizations already have the ability to communicate through maintenance contracts and things like that with their customers. So there isn't going to be a one size fits all, but we're working very hard to make sure that there are several clear lanes that makes it easy to choose which one's right for you.
Sorry, Carrie?
I expect it's going to be something that you'll request. The company will do it. It'll be part of their pipeline. It'll be part of their regular process that they go ahead and they do, just like they do SOC 2, just like they do, their internal and external pen testing. And then it'll be something that is requested that they go ahead and they provide. And what I'm hoping for is it just becomes standardized, and it just becomes something that, they know if you're doing anything with dev teams, doing anything with software, you should be able to request it, and you should, be able to generate it.
Got it. Caleb?
Yep, I imagine when I listen to Allan speak, I've started to visualize in my head either a decision tree or a matrix that says if this, then that. And depending on the characteristics of the organization or the use case, you'll fall into this bucket. And in this case, yes, you should by default publish them before anybody asks you. There's also probably going to be some people who don't fall into a bucket like that, but they say the benefits of us proactively doing it anyways makes sense. We know that there's some very large tech companies now who are making big bets on privacy. They want to be recognized for being privacy first. And others might someday say, we want to be transparent. We want people to feel good about what's in our product. And they may, spontaneously decide we're going to, by default, always publish our SBOMs.
Got it. And Cassie.
Well, I think I'm not going to say it's just a specific segment, but a B2B versus B2C. I think that you really need to understand who the audience is. There are certain levels and products that are highly sensitive. So having, I think, a secure pub sub model, publish, subscribe, where it's vetted beforehand so that you're aware of who that is and that there is an agreement in place because of the secure nature that some of the components can have, especially in our space where we're working with critical infrastructure. So I do not see it as a one size fits all. However, I do, as a consumer myself, it would be nice to know if certain things are in some of the things that I personally purchase or just have better visibility if I want to geek out.
Got it. Thank you very much. All the panelists here, we are above the hour here. So I want to personally thank, Gary, Allan, Cassie, and Calla for taking our time. And the recording for this will be available on the Purple Book Club website. And so again, thanks once again. Thanks to panelists. And thank you.